It's Reese here. As you can see, it's Christmas. You can see the cards behind me, the little bits of tinsel poking up there and stuff. You catch me very much at the end of 2025, and I thought what might be a fun thing for me to do is like a little roundup of the year, and sort of my highs and lows on sort of the film viewing front, films that I saw that were very surprising in a positive way, films that I was particularly disappointed by. And I thought I might make a nice little fun video to sort of wrap up the year, as well as doing sort of my monthly wrap up to reflect on some of the films that I've watched throughout the year. Um, so I've run the stats, and you can see my letterbox down below, so you can follow me there if you want to sort of have live updates and have a look at my sort of diary log and all that sort of stuff. When I say films of the year, I mean specifically films that were released in 2025. I'm not going to talk about everything I watched because again, that would be a sort of a ludicrous endeavour. But this year, 2025 films I watched 39 films. Um, and my list is going to be based around those films entirely. There's a lot of big films I didn't watch. I didn't watch any of the superhero stuff. There's whole genres that I didn't entertain. As perhaps maybe no surprise for people who know me, the vast majority of my list was horror films. So of the 39 films, 32 of them were horror films or horror thrillers or sort of things that sit in that camp. Alongside that, I watched 3 romances, I watched 2 comedy films, and then I watched 1 animation and 1 crime film. So not really a mixed bag in truth. That'd be putting it a little uncharitably. But what I wanted to do is reflect on the films that I really chimed with, and the films that I really didn't like, and then the films that surprised me in positive and negative ways. So this is sort of my summary, my tiny encapsulation of my new watches in 2025. So we begin with my choices for the best films. And I've chosen 2 that really chimed with me for 2 very sort of different reasons. It's worth stating there are some honourable mentions, so Sinners and Weapons, which I imagine will be sort of quite high at the top of most people's lists. I certainly really enjoyed, and was very lucky to see both of them not really knowing that much. I knew sort of the horror dimension of Sinners before I went in, slightly disappointed by that, but there we go. Knowing it, I mean. I really enjoyed both of those films and would really rate them. But the films I want to talk about are ones that really chimed with me. And the first is probably not a horror film that you're going to see sort of towards the top of a lot of people's lists. But the horror film that really spoke to me most this year as my new watches was Heart Eyes. So a Valentine slasher every year in America, the Heart Eyes killer strikes couples that are in love. It's a film starring Olivia Holt and Mason Gooding, sorry. I really enjoyed this. This is a film that is sort of half a cheesy Hallmark romance, half a film. Those are 2 things that speak to me, and the film mashed them up in really, really positive ways. It really worked. I really didn't think it was going to work, and it really worked. It did not stray on the violence, but it played the romance completely sincere and straight, even though for most of the film, the Olivia Holt character, in particular, is very insistent that the 2 are not a couple. So there's lots of brutal violence. I mean, it pleases the horror fans, lots of brutal violence, and there is a lot of sort of quite inventive killings. The opening killings in a winery, for example, a killing with a tire iron in a sort of a drive-through movie theatre, I really liked. But then I found the 2 leads really, really compelling. I liked the romance. I liked them. They were so charming. Of course, we know the way it's going to go, as is the way with all Hallmark films. But it just worked. It worked for me. It landed. It was charming. It was funny. It was violent. It was occasionally very jumpy. There's a wonderful sequence in which a sort of a fantastic romance sequence suddenly shifts to horror that really caught me off guard, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Not a perfect film by any stretch of the imagination. About partway through, the identity of the killer or killers, I'm not spoiling, becomes painfully obvious due to sort of the film doing something that all sort of horror films and crime films do, where they sort of want to misdirect. And if you've ever seen any of these films, from that moment on, you know they're the baddie, or one of the baddies, I should say. No spoilers. But I can overlook that because I found it so charming. I really liked it. I think the whole thing just worked. And there have been so many mashups of Christmas, Thanksgiving. A couple of years ago, I really enjoyed as well. A Valentine's slasher that really plays up both dimensions, plays up the horror, plays up the romance. Shouldn't work quite as well as this film did, and this one really did. So it just caught me off guard and really, really spoke to me. So Heart Eyes was really one of my picks of the year. Alongside that, I'm a comedy fan, and this year there was a new instalment in a franchise as one of my both some of my favourite films of all time. So how can I not put the reboot of The Naked Gun on my best of 2025 list? This film starring Liam Neeson as Leslie Nielsen's son, Frank Drebin Jr., as he investigates a murder that is linked to a tech billionaire played by Richard Houston. Along the way, he bumps into Pamela Anderson, who is the sister of the murder victim, and the two of them work together. Um, the film, I just laughed. I took my mother and my brother to the cinema, and I just laughed throughout. This is that sort of style of spoof humour, non sequiturs, throwaway gags, wordplay, physical humour. It's all there, um, and it just lands with me. It was wonderful. It really made me chuckle. It was wholeheartedly silly and fun. Um, that's a style of humour that I'm thrilled to see in recent years really has been making a comeback. Lots more spoof, so I know Scary Movie 6 is coming at some point this year. We also had Fackham Hall towards the end. It was this month, in fact, December, when I'm recording this, 2025, that I greatly enjoyed as well. There has been quite a lull, really, of good comedy in the past decade or so, and films are scared to be funny, almost. Um, this is sort of unabashedly silly humour and played with almost deadpan and sincerity by the leads. And this is why Leslie Nielsen was such an amazing star. His ability to sort of treat it seriously but also silly. Liam Neeson was an inspired casting choice for this. So you've seen hints of this, and he's about the only funny thing in Ricky Gervais's Life's Too Short. He played the sort of deadpan role in a cameo in Ted. He was in A Million Ways to Die in the West. And so he's got some comic chops, and they really shine here. Um, not every joke lands, but then not every joke landed in the Naked Gun films either. For everyone that doesn't, there are three more that do. It's just unabashedly silly, and although it doesn't quite recapture the same magic because we're in sort of far more of a postmodern time nowadays than we were when the first Naked Gun films and Airplane and all the classics of spoof humour came out. And this film is really everything that you'd hope a Naked Gun film looks like in 2025. So I was so thrilled to see it. Again, one of my picks of the year. I would highly recommend watching it, and if you enjoy it, watching all the Naked Guns, Airplane, many of the sort of brilliant spoof and parody films of the past as well. You would not be disappointed. From the best to the worst. And if you've seen some of my recent roundup videos, some of these names will not surprise you. So it's worth noting there were two Twisted Childhood Universe films, Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare and Bambi the Reckoning. Neither were overly brilliant. They're certainly improving as a thing, and they're thrown as an they're low budget. They are sort of, although the production values are getting better, there is sort of markedly less to it than some of these big studio films. So it's worth throwing away, but also acknowledging that sort of the expectations should be different. No, where I want to start is a film that has baffled, I think, about everyone who's watched it, which is the second instalment in the Strangers new timeline. The Strangers Chapter 2 came out this year, and the film is weird. It's really weird. So the first instalment was essentially sort of a soft remake of the original Strangers film from 2008. This film is kind of a chase sequence for 90 minutes. Madeline Pesh's character Mia is essentially just on the run from the strangers for the entirety of the time. She runs through a hospital, she runs through a forest, she meets people, runs from them, winds up in their house. Chaos ensues, and then she runs again. It's 90 minutes of her running with no real sort of real momentum. It's a baffling film. It's sort of boring. It's boring and not particularly engaging as a watch. The scares aren't really there. The gore's not really there. And the film makes some baffling choices, some absolutely bizarre decisions, including sequence to introduce some jeopardy. It turns out one of the strangers owns a wild boar that assaults Mia in the woods for some reason. And why do we know that one of the strangers keeps a ball? Because despite the fact that this entire franchise is based around these are strangers who could be anyone, and we don't need to know anything about them, it goes into excruciating detail, backstory on some of the strangers. It tells us about who Tamara is. It tells us so many things. It answers so many questions that should not be answered. Um, there's a lot of flack in horror circles for essentially sort of over-explaining the baddies, right? Um, Especially in longer running franchises, the thing just to add on more and more so, until they stop being scary, and because you sort of know everything. Um, this film sort of over explains a character whose whole premise is that it could be anyone and that they just appeared. Um, so many baffling choices. It sets up a third film, and I mean, really, the mark of a poor film is that it sets you up not wanting to go and see what comes next. The film is a bizarre interlude, and I'm left wondering, and I will go watch the third one for the sake of completion, whether this is three films that could have been one and sort of spun out for money or whatever. But this is one of the worst films because there's nothing to it. As I say, a 90-minute chase, weak scares, no over explaining, somehow too much story and not enough at the same time. The Strangers Chapter 2 is such a bizarre experience. It might be the case that Chapter 3 redeems it, but based on the strengths of Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 this year, I'd be surprised. Let's say that. I'd be very, very surprised. Coupled with The Strangers Chapter 2 is another installment in a franchise that really sort of cheapens and in a sense worsens what comes before. And that was Hell House LLC Lineage, the supposed final installment in the Hell House franchise. So the Hell House films, this was the fifth film. And prior to this, there were a series of found footage films featuring sort of a terrifying clown that sort of moved in the background of shots. It featured sort of lore about initially sort of cults and cultists, demons, tell, and then in a sort of a surprise out of the blue installment a few years ago, a manor owned by someone involved in sort of events in the past. They are sort of broadly effective. The clowns are terrifying, and it is a great example of that thing of using found footage and sort of scares coming, dread coming from sort of positions slightly having changed by things happening off screen, that you can't explain. The fact that the camera only offers some degree of security. I think they're hardly the best found footage films ever, but they do a great job. They really do effective things. So I'd recommend if you haven't seen. Anyway, Lineage takes a very different approach. In that it completely gives up on the found footage scenario. It completely gives up on that as a mode. Instead, offering a sort of a more conventional narrative logic that jettisons all the things that people liked about the previous installments. So it brings back lots of characters from the earlier films. Our central character was one of the survivors, I think, from the third film. It's a film that relies on you knowing everything. It's a film that really relies. You couldn't come into this one as a newcomer and really appreciate it because you'd have no sense of what was going on. I'll be honest, I had to do a lot of Googling myself just to have a vaguest clue of what was happening at the end of it. And because we don't have found footage, the clown, the terrifying central clown that is at the heart of this franchise, really, we don't get to see it sort of turn its head, whatever. Apart from in quite an effective opening sequence set in a sort of a fairground booth. No, we just see it walking. We see it killing. It's not frightening in the way that it was frightening. And I'm so confused by the decision to sort of jettison all of the things that the franchise was associated with. The decision to tell a supposedly grander story, but not really, and then to offer copious amounts of lore that require you to know sort of the backstory of the franchise inside out. And then to end on what is essentially a cliffhanger to something that you're promised is the final film in the franchise. It's so many confusing misfires. This was such a frustrating watch because although they're not the best films ever, I quite like the found footage. I quite like the franchise. I think that the director Stephen Leonetti has really tapped into something, and to see him just sort of jettison all of it, for a fifth film that doesn't land, doesn't even seem like it belongs in the same franchise. It was so bizarre and disappointing, and such a letdown. So it has to go down as one of the worst films of the year for me, and because by any standards, it was a bad film. It wasn't particularly scary, um, but it didn't even live up to its own promises. So let's talk surprises, and in this little video, I'm talking positive surprises, films that surpassed what I was expecting of them. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're brilliant. That doesn't necessarily mean they're my top films of the year. But they're films that I went into with a sort of a low bar, and was pleasantly uplifted by. And you can see my choices on the side of the screen. That's where they'll be. Um, Three of them there. The Monkey. So Osgood Perkins, an adaptation of a Stephen King story about a toy that, whenever it activates, causes the death of someone. Now Perkins has a particular style, the kind of style that fills things like Longlegs or The Black Coat's Daughter. So I went into this expecting another sort of Osgood Perkins film, i.e. a film filled with sort of soft dread, with sort of that sense of lingering unease rather than sort of explicit horror. And I was uneasy, especially after all the sort of the press and critical stuff around Longlegs, and then being sort of enjoying but not thinking it was the best film ever. But The Monkey very much surprised me. This is a film that is sort of very playful, very gory, very violent, and quite playful with it. It takes great fun in crafting these sorts of elaborate, over the top, and quite fun deaths, and does so with quite a striking sort of symbolic resonance about the impact of grief and death, and the fact that it's something that's always present in our lives. Sort of we learn to deal with it and cope with it. They This film stars Theo James in twin roles. He plays two twin brothers when they're older, supported by Tatiana Maslany as his mother when he's a kid. It was really, really fun. I went into this, as I say, expecting something that was very sort of somber and deep, and so there is a level of depth to it, very much so. I think people will be discussing this, and sort of as more Osgood Perkins films come out, it'll be discussed in line with them. I know he released Keeper this year, but I didn't get a chance to watch it before the end of the year. I'm going to rectify that within the next few weeks, I think. But yes, The Monkey, sort of quite gory, good fun, in a way that sort of the Final Destination films, when they want to be playful, has that same kind of vibe. I Know What You Did Last Summer, a legacy sequel to the original film. I put my ranking video of those franchises down below, and you'll know that I never particularly liked the original film. I found it a bit sort of. Although everyone talks about the Sarah Michelle Gellar chase sequence, other than that, it doesn't really linger in the imagination. This film, I was pleasantly surprised by. Again, I expected it to be quite a by the numbers slasher. But it went beyond what I was expecting, in part because the death sequences are sort of more engaging and brutal, I think, than in the first film. But also the film does something, and I don't want to go into spoiler detail here, but it does something that other legacy sequels haven't quite dared to do. Not 100% successfully, but I quite admire the effort. And there's a version in my head in which the sort of the dimensions of it work more effectively, where character motivations are a little more strongly aligned, where there's not a major clue given quite early in the film, and that something like that is coming. But I quite liked it. I found it really quite effective. The killer or killers is a bit obvious, but this is kind of the way with many of these films, especially when you've seen as many as I have. I love horror and crime, and so it sort of sets me off on the front foot, as it were. But yes, it's a film that was not afraid to play with the legacy sequel formula at a time when these legacy sequels are starting to become a bit stale. And some great performances here. Madeline Klein, in particularly, as one of the new friend group, who's this sort of spoiled brat with more dimensions. Freddie Prinze Jr. and Jennifer Love Hewitt return as Ray and Jennifer, and get more to do than I was expecting that they would get. Again, not the best slasher in the world. I'm not claiming this, but it's a film that sort of went above what I was expecting it to do. That's kind of the case again with my third pick for our pleasant surprises, Clown in a Cornfield. which I rocked up expecting essentially. The film would deliver on its name. A murderous clown stashing teens in a cornfield. Um, for a part, it is that, and it sets itself very much as that. But there is a twist that comes sort of quite early in the film, really, maybe sort of a third of the way in, where the clown, the murderous friendo, sets itself upon sort of teens partying in a party. That suddenly changed everything, and that I was very excited to see where it went. And this is a film that I think more than many of them that I've seen this year really sort of taps into a lot of the zeitgeist about the time. Sort of talking about nostalgia, this is a town that is sort of in hock to a syrup industry that sort of decayed and left many years ago. Um, it's a town sort of talking about sort of social media trolls and those sorts of annoying pranks with influencers. Um, so things like family and authority, privilege. Yeah, I was not expecting a film called Clown in the Cornfield to be quite as deep as it turned out being. I'm conscious, I've learned later there are books that probably go into this more detail. I did not know of them before I watched it. Um, but yeah, no, Clown in the Cornfield, I was really pleasantly surprised. And I really like the cast in this one as well. Um, the um, the central teens, when they began as sort of social media pranksters, I really expected to hate, because that is the kind of thing that really annoys me. But I gradually really grew to like them. Um, I was saying nothing for the identity of the killer or killers, as is my way. Um, but yeah, Clown and Cornfield, a very pleasant surprise in the game. One that I think you could go into knowing very little and get quite a lot out of it. So these are my picks here for the pleasant surprises of the year. Um, if you watch any of them, try and be as spoiler free as possible is normally the way. And if you do watch them, let me know what you think. I'd love to hear if you enjoyed them as much as I did. Finally, I want to talk about some of my disappointments of the year, films that I expected a lot of or didn't, but I went into and was really, really underwhelmed. Again, you see my three picks here, and I'd love to know if you agree with them because there's quite a mix there. We begin Lee Whannell's version of the Wolfman. Wolfman. Um, so, hot off the heels of directing The Invisible Man, Lee Whannell made another sort of modern day version of a Universal monsters film, and in this case, taking on the story of the Wolfman. In Whannell's version, a man goes home with his wife, Julia Garner, who's sort of the central character of the film, to see his father. Um, the father, it transpires, is some sort of wolfman, and the curse passes on to the son. This is a film that, Garner is quite interesting in the lead. She sort of holds you. She's sort of probably the strength of the film, but it doesn't. It's not particularly scary, and a lot of times it's actually quite laughable. The Wolfman is not a monster. It's inherently, I think, scary, and people, I'm sure, horror fans will beg to disagree with me there. Because at its core, when it was realised, it's essentially an animal, a wild animal. That's kind of the version that the Whannell version plays, but the animals are essentially men wandering around in the kind of makeup that Ari H. Corbett wore in Carry On Screaming. Or when he transformed into sort of an odd bod creature. Which is not particularly frightening. We've seen great werewolf films in the past. American Werewolf in London, most famously, with a sort of amazing transformation sequence. And this film is not that. This film is 90 minutes long and feels about twice the length. As the sequences, this is a film that just doesn't land, and it's quite disappointing that after Whannell so successfully reinvented The Invisible Man and transformed it, really a film that's always about sort of scientific hubris and sort of a man going mad with power, into sort of a tale of spousal abuse, domestic violence, etc., and really reinvented that monster for the modern day. And here he sort of lands in an awkward middle ground where the monster is not overly frightening, and he didn't do anything else with it other than sort of the sort of narrative of sort of the legacy illness that doesn't carry particularly. So yes, Wolfman was quite a disappointment. I expected more of it, in part because I expected little of The Invisible Man and really enjoyed it. But this is one that didn't land with me. Let's talk The Astronaut. So this is a film with an interesting premise, if there ever was one. So Kate Mara plays a astronaut who goes to space, lands back, and is worried, concerned that she's brought something back with her. She is seeing a monster. She's seeing something in the house where she's sort of recuperating after the space mission. And Kate, again, the lead performance by Kate Mara is sort of what holds this film together. And it's a film that, again, doesn't really sustain the tension, and it kind of collapses in a third act twist that's not overly hinted at. Hinted at very, very loosely, that sort of comes out of nowhere. And I found it really hard to sort of buy into for that reason. The film tries to do something really interesting, but hasn't really laid the groundwork for it. And otherwise, it's kind of stock, rinse, repeat of the O'Mara character blacking out, thinking she sees something, seeing a scanner in a house, but just misses the sight of whatever it is. The film, the strengths to it is broadly well shot. As I say, the Mara performance is great. Diego Luna and Lawrence Fishburne are supporting, and they don't get too much to do. But the film, again, I wasn't particularly invested. I wasn't particularly frightened. I was intrigued to see what sort of alien horror creature would appear, because that really is the direction in which the film is going. And it takes such a wild turn in the third act, that I couldn't get over and didn't buy into sort of the emotion or the fear of it. So I would not recommend that. Again, this is a film that I was intrigued because the premise was, if not novel, certainly sort of novelish in terms of a series of home invasions by human monsters. But it doesn't deliver. The film did not land with me. And then lastly, by far the most high-profile pick on the list, Rian Johnson's Wake Up Dead Man, the third film in the Knives Out franchise. So in this film, Josh O'Connor plays a priest in a parish, and Josh Brolin is the leader of the parish, who's sort of this sort of cult of personality figure, fire and brimstone preacher, kind of preoccupied with his own self. One day during a sermon, he collapses in a confessional, stabbed to death in a room that no one could have entered or exited. It's sort of your classic locked room mystery. And yes, eventually Benoit Blanc, played by Daniel Craig, comes along to investigate. This is a film that is not quite on the level of these two, in that sort of there are things I liked here. Craig is a compelling detective. Josh O'Connor is his sidekick, and the priest is the heart of the film. But I've really struggled with the Knives Out films because I don't find them particularly fair. I find them very sort of cheaty. I think Rian Johnson really cheats with the audience. He did this in Glass Onion, where he sort of essentially changed a scene on replay to sort of directly lie to the viewer. In this one, again, he sort of told the thing of not giving you all the clues or all the information. And there's nothing clever about that. There's nothing clever about viewers not being able to solve a mystery if they don't have the info to solve it. It's kind of, I hate the inherent unfairness of Johnson's crime films. Coupled with this, there's an all-star cast here, and a formidable cast again. You have Glenn Close, you have Brolin, you have Kerry Washington, you have Mila Kunis, you have Kaylee Spaney, you have Thomas Hayden Church, Jeremy Renner. I think in one of his first films since his accident, and they're wasted. They get so little to do. Much of the cast is essentially sort of Johnson ticking some of the boxes he likes to tick. It's a condemnation of religion. It's a condemnation of figures like Donald Trump. So the politics there are sort of more implied than they were in Glass Onion, where he was having to go at Elon Musk, but they're still fairly on the nose, I think. And it even has a chance to poke fun at people who didn't like his very controversial and not very good Star Wars film. It's a film that feels like it wants to be more profound and clever than it is. It's a kind of cheating that really wound me up when I saw it in sort of the Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock. It's a kind of cheating I really hated in Glass Onion. And again, I was really underwhelmed because there's lots of potential here. It's a beautiful Gothic church, great potential for a locked room mystery. The play with classic detective tropes. At one point, one of the characters produces a list of classic crime novels for a reading group. There's lots here to like, but there's also lots here not to like, and that more was on the side I landed. I was really let down, and because again I go into them expecting to be sort of pleased in the way I am when I watch a Poirot or something like that. And every time I feel cheated, and I don't really want to feel cheated when I watch a film. So again, sort of Ryan Johnson's Wake Up Dead Man, it was one of my disappointments of the year. I suppose hand on heart I knew it probably would be, but I tried to be optimistic. So there we go. My review of some of the best, some of the worst, and some of the surprises and disappointments I had of the new releases that I watched in 2025. I mean, I'd love to hear your versions down below. I'd love to hear the films that really spoke to you, the films that annoyed you, that you loved, that you were pleasantly surprised by all of this. And so please do comment below with your picks. Please do comment below with the films that spoke to you in positive or negative ways throughout the year. I would love to hear them, and I'd love to hear the sort of diversity of things that you guys are watching. And thank you very much for watching this video. Please do like, please do subscribe, please do ring a bell so you know when new videos are coming. I'm looking forward to being with you throughout the year, bringing more film content, film analyses, tier lists, etc. That sort of stuff. But if you have ideas for what you'd like, please do comment below. Right, thank you so much for watching this video. Have an amazing 2026. I look forward to seeing you all in the next one.